There is a moment most of us know, but rarely talk about out loud.
It is the moment when you have done everything right.
Prayed every prayer, waited with as much patience as you could gather, and still, nothing has changed.
The situation hasn't shifted.
The answer hasn't come. The person you love is still suffering, the job is still gone, the diagnosis is still sitting on the table like something that doesn't belong in your life. And somewhere in the silence of that moment, a quiet and terrifying question rises up inside you, not loud enough to be a shout, but sharp enough to cut deep. It sounds something like this. If God is real, and if God is good, and if God actually knows me, then why does this feel so completely, utterly alone? You don't say it at church, you don't post it online, but you think it at 2 in the morning when the world is quiet and your mind refuses to stop turning. And what makes it harder is that everyone around you keeps using the same phrase, the same soft, well-meaning instruction. Just trust God. They say it like it's simple, like it's a switch you flip, like the problem is just that you haven't tried hard enough to believe. But here is what nobody is saying out loud, what this whole conversation actually needs to begin with. Trusting God when nothing makes sense is not the same thing as pretending everything is fine.
It was never supposed to be.
Most people, when they hear the phrase, trust God, immediately imagine a kind of spiritual stillness, a serene face, a person who has somehow managed to detach from their pain and float above it all in a cloud of peaceful acceptance. They picture someone who has stopped asking questions, stopped crying, stopped feeling the weight of what is happening. Someone who has simply handed it all over and now walks through the storm with a smile. And because that image is so unreachable, so disconnected from the raw reality of what they are actually feeling, they conclude one of two things. Either they are not spiritual enough to pull it off, or trust is something other people have and they don't.
Both conclusions are wrong.
Both of them are missing the entire point of what trust actually is. Here is the real problem beneath the surface, and it is worth sitting with this for a moment before we move forward. Because this is where everything shifts. The reason trusting God feels impossible when nothing makes sense is not a lack of faith. It is a misunderstanding of what faith is asking you to do. You have been taught, somewhere along the way, maybe through culture, maybe through well-meaning people, maybe through years of trying to be good, that trust means certainty. That if you really trust, you will feel confident. You will feel peaceful. You will feel like you know how it ends. But trust was never built on certainty. Trust was built for uncertainty. It only exists because the outcome is unknown. Think about the people in your life you trust most deeply. You don't trust them because you can predict exactly what they'll do. You trust them because you have seen who they are, in the small moments, in the hard ones, in the times when they could have walked away, but didn't. Trust is relational. It is historical. It is not the absence of fear. It is the presence of someone whose character you know, even when you cannot see their plan. And this is the central idea that everything else in this conversation will orbit around. So hold on to it. Trusting God is not about controlling the outcome in your mind before it happens. It is about knowing the nature of the one you are trusting, even when the circumstances give you every reason to doubt. That is a completely different thing. And once you feel the difference, the weight of what you've been carrying starts to shift. Let's get specific now, because philosophy without application is just beautiful noise, and you deserve more than that. Think about anxiety, real anxiety, the kind that wakes you up at night, the kind that plays the same worst-case scenario on a loop, no matter how many times you tell yourself to stop. When you are told to trust God in the middle of that anxiety, what does that actually mean? What are you supposed to do with the fear that is physically sitting in your chest? Here is what most people try to do. They try to argue themselves out of the feeling. They recite verses. They remind themselves of what they believe. They try to manufacture peace by sheer force of will.
And when it doesn't work,
When the fear is still there 10 minutes later, they feel like they have failed spiritually, like they are broken in some way that other believers are not. But forcing yourself to stop feeling afraid is not trust. It is suppression. And suppression is exhausting, and it never lasts.
real trust looks more like this.
You acknowledge the fear without becoming it. You say, I feel this. I do not know how this ends. I cannot control it. And I am choosing, right now, to remain in relationship with the one who does.
That's it.
That is the whole movement. It is not a leap into certainty, it is a lean into presence. If this guide has helped you, write 1 in the comments, and if not, write 0. This way, I'll know which tips are most useful for your garden.
Now let's talk about control.
Because this is where the real spiritual work lives for most people, and it is uncomfortable in the best possible way. Control is not just a behavior, it is a theology. When you are gripping your life with both hands, obsessively planning, rehearsing conversations before they happen, unable to rest because rest feels like losing ground, you are not just stressed.
You are operating from a belief.
The belief is, if I let go, something terrible will happen that I could have prevented. And that belief, underneath it all, says, I cannot trust anything beyond myself.
That is not a personality trait.
That is a wound, and it usually comes from somewhere real, a time when you did trust and it went badly. A time when someone was supposed to show up and didn't. A time when the thing you hoped for became the thing that broke you. Control was the answer your nervous system came up with. It made sense then, it kept you safe. But it is costing you something enormous right now, because it is keeping you from the very rest that trust is supposed to give you.
And here is the paradox that nobody warned you about.
The more tightly you hold on, the more exhausted and afraid you become, because the weight of managing everything is infinite, and you are not.
Let's talk about relationships now, because
This is where the philosophical becomes unbearably personal for most people.
you love someone who is making choices that hurt them,
Or you. You can see what they can't see. You have tried to help, to guide, to influence, to pray, and nothing has changed. And now you are told, trust God with them. Let go. Surrender them. And something in you screams, because letting go feels like abandonment, and surrender feels like giving up on someone you love. But surrender in the spiritual sense is not abandonment. It is the decision to stop being God in someone else's story.
because here is what happens when you keep holding on.
You exhaust yourself without helping them. You carry what was never yours to carry. And in your exhaustion, you become less present, less loving, less like the person you actually want to be. Releasing someone to God is not the end of love. It is love choosing its proper boundaries. It is saying, I will be here. I will care. I will show up. But I will not pretend to be the source of their salvation, because I'm not, and neither are you.
Now let's go deeper.
Because there is a level beneath behavior and beyond emotion where the real transformation happens.
Most conversations about trust,
Focus on what you do. Do you pray? Do you act faithfully? Do you go to church? Do you read the right things?
but what is actually at stake?
When nothing makes sense, is not your behavior, it is your identity.
Because when the answer doesn't come,
And the silence stretches and the confusion deepens, the question underneath all the other questions is this: am I the kind of person who is seen, known, and held, or am I ultimately alone?
and that question,
Goes so far back, it almost has no beginning. It predates your theology. It predates your doubts. It lives in the part of you that formed before you had words for any of it. Trusting God in the dark is, at its deepest level, an answer to that question. Not a feeling, not a guarantee, an answer. It is the choice to say, even here, even now, even in this, I believe I am not ultimately alone. Not because the evidence is overwhelming, but because I have seen enough of who God is to remain in the room. That is what the great people of faith across every tradition have done. Not floated above their pain, but chosen to stay in the relationship through it. Think about the moments in your own life, not the easy ones, but the ones that nearly undid you. The loss that reshaped your entire world. The diagnosis that changed how you thought about the future. The betrayal that made you wonder if you had ever really known anyone. In those moments, what you needed was not a simple answer. What you needed was a presence large enough to hold the question without being destroyed by it. And that is exactly what trust is reaching for. Not an explanation, a presence. Something, someone, larger than the chaos who does not flinch from the weight of it. Here is a practical thing you can begin to do, and it is smaller than you think, but deeper than it looks. When you are in the middle of confusion, when nothing makes sense, and the fear is loud, and the silence from heaven feels unbearable, stop trying to figure it out for a moment. Not forever, not passively, just for a moment. And instead of reaching for an answer, reach for an anchor. An anchor is something you already know to be true about the character of the one you are trusting. Something that does not depend on today's circumstances to remain true. Maybe it is a moment from your own history where something turned out differently than you feared. Maybe it is a quality, goodness, faithfulness, presence, that you have encountered in a way you cannot fully explain, but also cannot fully deny. Hold that, not as a weapon against your fear, but as a ground to stand on while the storm continues. You don't have to stop the storm to survive it. You have to find something solid beneath your feet. This is not toxic positivity. This is not pretending. You are allowed to say the storm is real and violent, and I don't know when it ends, and also say, but I am not standing on sand. Both things can be true at the same time. There is something else worth naming, because it comes up for almost everyone who takes their faith seriously, and it is rarely spoken about honestly. Sometimes the reason you cannot trust God is not philosophical. It is relational. You are angry, not gently frustrated, not theologically uncertain, genuinely, deeply, quietly furious. At the silence, at the suffering, at the way the world does not run the way a loving God should let it run. And because you are taught that anger at God is dangerous or disrespectful or a sign of weak faith, you have buried that anger under layers of very correct language. You say the right things. You show up in the right places. But underneath, there is a fire that has nowhere to go. Here is what you need to hear. Anger is not the opposite of trust. Indifference is the opposite of trust. The fact that you are furious means you took the relationship seriously. It means you believed in it enough to be devastated when it felt like it failed you. And every major spiritual tradition has room for that. The Psalms are full of it. Not polished prayers, but raw, desperate, almost accusatory conversations with God. Where are you? How long? Why have you forgotten me? Those were not failures of faith. They were expressions of it. Deep enough to be honest, secure enough to not pretend. If you have been holding anger at God that you have never let yourself speak, consider that the act of saying it, out loud, honestly, without decorating it, might be the beginning of the trust you have been trying to manufacture through willpower. Real trust can hold honesty. It can hold grief. It can hold fury. What it cannot hold is the performance of peace you do not feel, because that is not trust, that is theater, and theater exhausts everyone involved. Let's come back now to the center of everything, because we have traveled far enough into the territory that the original question deserves a new answer. What does it mean to trust God when nothing makes sense? It means you stop trying to make sense of it on your own timeline, not because sense doesn't matter, but because your timeline is not the only one operating. There is a scale to existence that human beings are genuinely not built to perceive in full. We experience time linearly, and we judge meaning by what is visible now. And we measure love by whether our prayers are answered in the shape we imagined. But meaning can be working backward from a future you cannot yet see. Love can be present in forms you are not currently able to recognize. The silence is not always absence. Sometimes it is preparation. Sometimes it is protection. Sometimes it is the space in which you are being asked to grow in a direction that ease would never have allowed.
This is not a comfortable thought.
It is not supposed to make the pain stop, but it is supposed to offer your soul a ledge to stand on. The possibility that what feels like abandonment is actually something else entirely, something you will only understand from a different vantage point. Trust is the decision to leave space for that possibility, even while the pain is real. And here is where the practical and the spiritual come together in a way that is actually livable. You do not have to feel at peace to act from trust. Trust is not primarily a feeling, it is a posture, a direction, a choice you make repeatedly, especially when the feeling is not there. Every time you resist the urge to control what you cannot control, that is trust. Every time you choose to be present in a moment instead of catastrophizing about the next one, that is trust. Every time you speak honestly with God instead of performing composure you don't have, that is trust. Every time you take the next small step without needing to see the whole path, that is trust. And these small acts of trust accumulate. They do not solve your problem, not immediately, but they reshape you. They change the architecture of how you move through uncertainty. Over time, the person who practices trust in small ways discovers something that cannot be taught by argument, that they are still standing, that they have been held through things they were sure would break them, that the ground beneath them has been more solid than they believed. That is not faith replacing experience. That is experience becoming the foundation of faith. As we move toward the end of this conversation, I want to ask you something, and I want you to actually sit with it, not answer it quickly. When was the last time you genuinely trusted something you could not control? Not because it was easy, not because you had certainty, but because you made the choice to lean into a relationship rather than retreat into yourself. Maybe it was with a person. Maybe it was a moment where you let go of something you had been holding for years, and you breathed differently afterward. That experience, whatever it was, is not separate from the spiritual life. It is the spiritual life. It is what you are being asked to do now, in the particular storm you are in, with the particular questions that have no clean answers yet. You are not being asked to stop being human. You are not being asked to stop feeling, stop questioning, stop hurting. You are being asked to bring all of that, the fear, the fury, the confusion, the hope that keeps showing up, even when you try to suppress it, and bring it towards something rather than away from everything. That movement, even when it is slow and unsteady and barely visible, is what trust looks like in the dark. It does not always look like peace. Sometimes it looks like continuing to pray when you feel nothing. Sometimes it looks like choosing not to make a desperate decision from a place of fear. Sometimes it looks like telling one honest person, "I am not okay, and I am still here." These are not small things. They are enormous things, dressed in ordinary clothes. And the God that most spiritual traditions describe, not the God of performance and reward, but the God of presence and patience. That God is not waiting for you to have it all together before being available to you. That presence is available now, in the not knowing, in the waiting, in the honest, imperfect, still reaching version of you that showed up today. You do not have to earn your way to trust. You do not have to clean yourself up first. You do not have to stop being afraid before you are allowed to begin. You are already in the middle of the story. The question is not whether you are ready. The question is whether you will lean in or pull away. And something in you, the fact that you are here, the fact that you are still asking the question, the fact that this still matters enough to ache, tells me you already know the answer.
You have always known the answer.
You just needed someone to say out loud that the knowing is allowed to be complicated, that the trust is allowed to be imperfect, and that the road through the darkness is a road, not a void.
You are on it.
You have been on it. Keep going.